Hi again, everybody. Every time you've come in and out of this city over the past 10 years, you've seen this phrase, you will do better in Toledo. Today, we're going to talk about the origin of that phrase. We're going to save it till the end, but we're going to try to understand a time in Toledo when things really seemed to get better every day, starting in the 1890s and going through about 1914. So let's get into it. First, let's talk about the literal rise of Toledo. Skyscrapers, which at that point were skyscrapers, and let's be honest, even the tallest building in Toledo is still a skyscraper compared to other cities. Skyscrapers start going up in the 1890s. One of the first tall buildings in town was the Valentine Theater building. This was only 4 stories tall. You can still see it today. It's at St. Clair Madison. And it also held the offices to City Hall. And eventually, in 1914, it's going to have the You Will Do Better in Toledo sign on top of it. First real tall building was the Nasbie Building. And this building still exists at Huron and Madison, 9 stories tall. Today, it's the one if you go to the corner of Huron and Mad, it's the one that looks real torn up because they've finally torn all the ugly stuff they put over the front of it in the 1950s and 60s. They've torn that stuff off to try and start restoring it to the way it looked here in this picture. But that is going to be a process. After that, right around the corner from the Nasbie Building, you have the Gardner Building, which still exists also. This is at Superior in Madison, and it was the first fireproof building in the city. Right after that, and right next to the Gardner Building is right here, and the Spitzer Arcade is right back here. Spitzer Building was built in 1895, 10 stories tall, Huron and Madison. It is one of the coolest buildings in the city of Toledo, and there's nothing in it right now. But the first floor of it was a shopping mall called the Spitzer Arcade up until very recently, like the past 10 years. And then the upper parts, you see these upper floors have like these bump out windows, big arches. And then in the middle of the building, there's a courtyard that goes all the way that's white and gold, and it's incredible. This is that old mall on the first floor of the Spitzer Arcade, a picture from just a few years ago when you had lots of little shops in there and stuff in a downtown building. I don't think anybody who didn't work downtown knew about it. Right across from the Spitzer, right across Huron from the Spitzer, is the Nicholas Building. 17 stories, Huron and Madison, built in 1907, which was Fifth Third's base of operations until they moved into the big tower by the river. 1912, down by the river at Summit in Madison, you had the Toledo Trust Building, built in 1912. This is today the Riverfront Apartments. It's near the Balance Grill downtown. There's a parking garage all hooked up to the other side of it. And in the back, you can see the Commodore Perry, and you can see the PNC building right there, which might be good frames of reference for you. So you've got all these buildings. What do those buildings have? They had businesses. Who worked in those businesses? Well, people from all over. And how did those businesses do work with other people? They did it through the urban connections that we had. This is kind of crazy to think about. We had better public transportation in Northwest Ohio in the 1890s than we do today. Today, if you live in Bryan, Ohio, and you want to get into Toledo, you have to take a car. If you really had a lot of money to throw around and didn't care about how you were using it, maybe you would use the train. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to be in a car. And the same to get from Bowling Green to Maumee, to Toledo. You need to be in a car. There's not a bus. There's not a taxi. An Uber is going to cost you a fortune. And back then we had these electric railways. I'll show you one of the cars from those electric railways. They look like this. They weren't trains with multiple cars. It was one car. And this one car would pick up people at the stations along the way and connect them between the cities. That's why it was called an interurban, because it went between the urban areas. And again, not big cities. You had like Pioneer, Ohio, which is a town of about 2,000 people out in Williams County. You get a train from Pioneer into Toledo with daily service. From Findlay up to Toledo with daily service. Fostoria, connecting in Pemberville to Bowling Green to Toledo, daily service. It's just kind of insane to think that we had better public transportation 130 years ago than we do today. Now, one of the other things about public transportation, the public transportation within the city, which was called Toledo Traction, public transit in the city was typically owned by companies. And those companies, you paid more on a trolley the further you went, right? Same thing if you get on the Ohio Turnpike. the farther you go on the turnpike, the more it costs you. And it was the same on a trolley back then. To get people to pay the full fare on the trolley, to get them to go all the way out as far as it went, many of these companies built amusement parks at the end of the trolley lines. This right here was located up by where Bayview Retirees Golf Course and the sewage treatment plant are on Summit Street today. You see there was a roller coaster right here. There was a casino out here and band hall. This was the Bayview Park and Casino. And it was considered like the place to go back in the day. It had these light up arches. You can imagine what this must have looked like at night when you went out there. Must have been really, really, really cool. This is another view of the Bay Park, the Bay Park, or Bayview Park and Casino. Casino out there in the middle of the river, and the roller coaster kind of gently rolling out there. This is another view of a different roller coaster at a place that was called Willow Beach Park. And Willow Beach was in Point Place where Cullen Park is today. So if you take Summit Street all the way out to the point, there's a park right when you kind of cross into Point Place proper called Cullen Park. And Cullen Park is where Willow Beach Park was. Here's more views of that. You can see the roller coaster in the background. This was a guy trying to look awesome in front of a whirligig ride that swirled around, and you've gotten these planes. And behind is a view of that whirligig ride just above my bald head. The other thing Toledo was at that point was a city of attractions. There were many different attractions in the city and places to stay. So 1903, the Plaza Hotel opens, and it was one of the nicest hotels in town. And in fact, there were some people who chose to live there year round. Wealthier people, if you lived at the hotel did your laundry and cleaned your room for you, and you could order meals brought up. It was a great way to live. You can see this picture of the plaza from back in the 1940s as it kind of used to appear. And then this is a picture from today. And you can kind of make out like that front porch right there. And then that really cool courtyard entrance back here as it appeared then and as it appears now. One of the next hotels to open was the Secor at Jefferson and Superior. Over here on the right, you've got the Jefferson as it appeared when it opened. I'm sorry, the Secor as it appeared when it opened on Jefferson. Up top, that big sign that said Hotel Secor, fireproof. And the building still exists today. It used to be Toledo School for the Arts before they moved to the old Jeep factory. I'm honestly not sure what's in the Secor Hotel these days, but it's right next to the Seagate Convention Center. This was the lobby of the inside of the Secor. And I used to work in the Secor. The Secor Hotel is now called the Secor Building, and I used to work up on the 9th floor of that building. And I assure you, this lobby looked nothing like this when I worked in there. The pillars were gone. They certainly didn't have the nice leather furniture. Just a really, really gorgeous looking place. Another thing that opened that was a big attraction in Toledo in 1910 was the Walbridge Park Zoo. Not called Toledo Zoo until after World War II. It was always the Walbridge Park Zoo. And one of the only buildings out there was what is today the Carnivore Cafe, and back then was the Carnivore House. So many of you guys have been here. You know that you can eat outside during the summer in those cages, and that's where the lions and stuff used to be when I was a kid. A few years before that, Toledo Museum of Art opened for the first time, funded in large part by Edward Drummond and Florence Libby. The Libby family really endowed the art museum very nicely. And it was not the two buildings that you probably know today. It was just the one big building. The peristyle was added on later. Another thing you could do with your extra time and extra money was go to baseball games. The Mud Hens have been around since the 1890s. Originally, they played out at Bayview Park and Casino. They bumped around a little bit after that. And then around the turn of the century, they ended up at this stadium called Armory Park. And Armory Park was at Cherry and Spielbush, where kind of near where the federal courthouse is today. And to get your bearings, you can see that we're standing in the outfield here at Armory Park. Home plate is back there, but then there's the dome of the Lucas County Courthouse back there. So you can kind of figure out where you are. If you imagine that you're standing at Spielbush and Cherry and looking at the courthouse, that's where this baseball field was. The next baseball park that the Mud Hens had from the 19-teens through the 1960s was Swain Field, which you guys are familiar as Swain Field Shopping Center. You know the McDonald's that's at Detroit and Monroe. where the summer of 2020, there were some kind of awful incidents that happened at Swain Field. But I think you guys know this pretty well. The Boys and Girls Club is right here. And I-75 is back here. So I want you to look at this for reference. Look at these three buildings back here. Those were an old paint company that today is a U-Haul warehouse. And if we look back at this picture from the 1930s, you can see those three buildings again back here. Same three buildings. So basically speaking, home plate for Swain Field, where Babe Ruth hit, Josh Gibson hit, Satchel Paige pitched from the mound there. Most of the best players from early baseball, especially from the Negro Leagues, came through Toledo, and they played at Swain Field here. And if we place that home plate and pitcher's mound, it's probably, it probably would have been right about out here. In the middle of the parking lot in front of the Save-A-Lot at Swain Field Shopping Center is where some of the greatest baseball players in the history of America ever plied their craft, was out in the middle of this parking lot at Detroit and Monroe. Along the way, it wasn't just buildings, it was people. To the left, we have Golden Rule Jones, and to the right, Brand Whitlock. Jones's name, of course, still exists with Jones Junior High. And Whitlock's name used to be attached to a housing project in town. But I think both of them have been forgotten a lot. These were two of the greatest leaders in Toledo history, bar none, no questions asked. You look for the two greatest mayors in Toledo history, they were back to back 120 years ago. Golden Rule Jones had owned a company called Acme Sucker Rod in town. The sucker rod that they made was something that was used in pumping oil. And Jones believed in treating his workers fairly. Do unto others as you'd have done to you, the golden rule, and he became known as Golden Rule Jones. Comes into office, he fights crime, fights poverty, fights inequality. He doesn't want his police just being the toughest gang on the streets, so he takes their weapons away, takes away their billy clubs, and gives them walking sticks. He brought back city utilities, and then he dies in 1904. So there's an interim mayor for a little bit, and then they have another election in 1905, and they elect Brand Whitlock, who's every bit as good as Golden Rule Jones. Whitlock is another great reforming mayor, who really helps build Toledo into an industrial powerhouse. Now, how good was Brand Whitlock? How good a mayor was he? He was good enough that the President of the United States made him stop being mayor and made him our ambassador to Belgium at the beginning of World War I. That is how highly Brand Whitlock was thought of. And we'll come back to his adventures in World War I later. Now, at the end of Whitlock's administration, a contest was held to have a new slogan for the city. And of course, this brings us back to "You will do better in Toledo." This great big sign was 100 feet long and 50 feet high, and it was atop the Valentine Theater building. It came to life just before Christmas in 1913. 7,000 light bulbs lit this thing up. And you'll notice that there was a train. You can kind of see the outline of the train right here. And then a ship down in here. It was to show again the importance of transportation, that in Toledo you have access to the rest of the world. Whitlock accepts it as his last public act as mayor. In the winter of 1913, he accepts the sign on behalf of the city, and then a month later he leaves for Washington, D.C., gets his orders to report to Europe, and he's going to arrive in Europe at a very incredible time, and Whitlock is going to lead a very incredible rest of his life. One of the most impressive Toledoans in history. Folks, thanks for sticking with me through this. Hope you found it interesting. We're going to talk about one other thing people in Toledo did for fun at this time, which was go to boxing matches. And we're going to have a very special guest to talk about those boxing matches with us. Thanks a lot for your time, guys. And as always, be well.